The sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows that stretched like fingers across the forest floor. The dense woods seemed to swallow up the sound of the wind as it rustled through the leaves, offering only the occasional crackle of a twig breaking underfoot. Beneath the trees, the earth was soft, thick with the smell of damp leaves and moss, while the towering pines above murmured quietly, caught in an eternal conversation with the breeze. A mother deer and her fawn wandered through this quiet sanctuary. The meadow ahead of them, once vibrant with life, now lay still and desolate. The fawn, only a few months old, followed her closely, its legs still unsteady on the uneven ground. They were creatures of the wild, accustomed to moving silently, but today their steps felt heavier, as if they could sense the change in the air. Once, this meadow had been lush with wild grasses, abundant with herbs and shrubs, and filled with the calls of birds and the scurry of small mammals. It was a place where deer could graze without fear of danger, a place where the young ones learned to navigate the world. But today it felt like a forgotten place, its beauty reduced to barren patches of ground and desiccated leaves that crunched underfoot. The air held a tension as if nature itself was holding its breath. The fawn's nose twitched, picking up something foreign in the wind, a scent that didn't belong. Its mother paused, ears flicking, a signal of alertness. The stillness was deeper here, unnaturally so. Even the usual forest sounds had quieted, the birds hushed, the rustling of small animals gone. The fawn's eyes darted nervously as its mother motioned forward. The pair moved cautiously, their steps measured, gliding through the grass, wary but determined to find food. But the meadow offered nothing. Only the occasional gust of wind would stir the dead grass, sending it whispering across the ground. The fawn nibbled at the few sparse tufts of grass, but it was weak and dry, lacking the richness it needed to thrive. The mother kept her head low, her eyes scanning the horizon. Every so often her body would stiffen, a subtle shift in posture that betrayed an underlying unease. She could feel the change, the absence of the usual life that should have been here. The familiar scent of the meadow, once rich with the earthy aroma of wildflowers and fresh grass, had been replaced by something else. The scent of decay lingered faintly on the air. As they moved deeper into the meadow, the fawn's pace slowed, its youthful energy spent in the absence of nourishment. The mother, desperate to find something, anything to sustain them, led her young one forward. They came upon a large, gnarled tree at the edge of the meadow, its twisted roots breaking through the earth like bones. Here the grass seemed a little taller, a little greener, and for a moment the mother allowed herself to believe that perhaps, just perhaps, they had found a patch of respite. But as they moved closer, something unusual caught her eye. The ground around the tree was strangely bare. The soil was cracked and dry, the remnants of what should have been vibrant plant life now nothing but a shadow. She lowered her head to inspect the soil, her ears swiveling, but there was no sound, no movement. Nothing. Suddenly, the fawn let out a soft bleat, a sound so out of place in the eerie silence that it sent a shock of alarm through the mother. She looked up, her muscles tensing. The fawn was stepping away from the tree, its nose twitching, its body shaking. A distant, low rumble echoed from the forest. It was faint at first, barely audible above the wind, but it grew steadily louder, an unsettling growl that vibrated through the air. The mother's heart raced. She had heard this sound before, a sound she would never forget. The predators were near. They had come for them. The rumble grew closer, and the trees ahead began to shudder. The branches swayed in unnatural rhythms, and the ground beneath them seemed to tremble. The mother's instincts screamed at her to run, to escape with her fawn. But she hesitated. The woods were filled with dangers, more than just the obvious predators. Something else was happening here, something that made her blood run cold. The fawn, too, seemed to feel it, a sudden shift in the atmosphere. Its small body trembled, and its eyes darted from side to side, searching for an explanation that was not forthcoming. The growl was no longer distant. It was right there, close. The trees parted, and from the shadows a figure emerged. It wasn't the predator the mother had feared, nor any creature she had encountered in the wild. It was something much larger, much darker. A strange silhouette against the fading light, its form barely distinguishable from the forest itself. It was the landscape, but twisted, distorted, unnatural. The air seemed to bend around it, and with every step it took, the ground beneath its feet cracked and curled. The thing moved like a shadow, its presence heavy, consuming the light around it. The mother deer froze, her heart hammering in her chest. She knew that this wasn't just another predator. It was something far worse, something that had been shaping this land in ways she didn't understand. The meadow, once a thriving haven, had been poisoned, its life drained away by something unnatural. The twisted form at the edge of the clearing was a manifestation of that destruction, a sign that the balance had been disrupted in ways no one, not even the ancient creatures of the forest, could have foreseen. In a last, desperate attempt, the mother deer turned and bolted, urging her fawn to follow, but the ground beneath her shifted. Roots and earth clung to her hooves, holding her back. The creature was closing in, its presence smothering the very life from the air. The fawn, sensing its mother's distress, paused. The meadow was empty now, save for the two of them and the looming presence of whatever was making the earth tremble. The fawn's legs trembled beneath it, its small body unsure whether to run or stand still. But as the mother called out with a final cry, her voice carried by the wind, the fawn understood. It was no longer just a place of hunger. It was a place of death, a place where the land itself was dying and the creatures that inhabited it were lost. The mother's hooves finally freed themselves from the grip of the earth. She turned back for her fawn, only to see it standing frozen in place, staring at the ominous silhouette that loomed ever closer. The wind picked up again, howling through the trees, and the last light of the day bled away, plunging the meadow into darkness. The mother deer's heart stilled as she reached for her young one. It was too late, and the shadow moved once again, swallowing all in its path. As the shadow shifted, the air grew colder, denser, the weight of its presence pressing down on the meadow like a storm cloud that would never break. The mother deer, panic rising in her chest, took a tentative step forward, her hooves barely scraping the earth. But before she could reach her fawn, a sudden crack echoed through the clearing. A sound so sharp and unnatural, it felt like a snap in the fabric of the world itself. The fawn's eyes widened in terror, but it didn't move. Its small body seemed rooted to the spot, caught between the safety of its mother and the suffocating pull of the thing that had appeared. The mother's instincts screamed at her to act, to reach her fawn before whatever this shadow was could reach them first. But she could feel the very ground beneath her quiver, as though something was holding them both in place. The rumble from the forest grew louder still, now a deep, ominous growl that vibrated through the trees. It was not the growl of an animal, but something far more primal, a sound that resonated from deep within the earth. The entire landscape seemed to be reacting to the presence of the creature, its roots and rocks shifting, as though the very bones of the earth were being manipulated. The mother deer strained against the invisible force, her muscles trembling. But she was too weak to break free. And then, as quickly as it had appeared, the shadow seemed to dissipate, vanishing like a wisp of smoke on the wind. The meadow stood still once again, but the atmosphere remained thick with unease. The trees whispered, the wind howled, but there was no movement, no sound of life. In the sudden silence, the mother deer's heart raced, pounding in her chest. She looked at her fawn, her body trembling with both relief and fear. The fawn, too, was still, frozen in place, its wide eyes searching the empty space around them. Had it been a vision? A trick of the mind? Or had something truly come to claim the land? The eerie quiet was broken only by the faintest rustling in the underbrush. The mother deer instinctively turned her head toward the sound, her senses heightened, her ears flicking forward. A pair of eyes gleamed from the darkness between the trees. Another creature? No, it wasn't a predator. It was the silhouette of something smaller, something familiar. A fox, its russet fur blending seamlessly into the shadows, stepped into the clearing. Its gaze flickered between the mother and fawn, its posture low, cautious. The fox seemed oddly out of place in this silent, barren meadow, but there it was, moving deliberately toward them. The mother deer watched it closely. She had seen foxes before, intelligent, cunning creatures, but this one felt different, as if it too had felt a disturbance in the land. The fox moved in slow, deliberate steps, pausing every so often to sniff the air, its tail flicking uneasily behind it. Without warning, the fox stopped a few paces away from the mother, its eyes locking with hers. There was no aggression in the creature's stance, no fear, only a calm awareness, as if it understood the shift in the very essence of this place. The wind stirred again, sharper this time, and the fox's ears perked. It glanced toward the forest, then back at the deer. It seemed to hesitate, as if weighing its options, before it turned, disappearing into the shadows of the trees with a final flick of its tail. The mother deer, her body still taut with tension, lowered her head to nudge her fawn. There was no sign of danger now, no indication of the strange presence that had consumed the meadow, but something had changed. Something she couldn't fully understand. She could feel it in the air, in the stillness around her, in the silence that had replaced the usual hum of life. With a heavy heart, the mother nudged her fawn forward, guiding it gently through the meadow. The once vibrant grasses were still bare, but now they seemed even more desolate. It was as if the land itself had been stripped of its spirit. As they made their way back toward the edge of the forest, the mother couldn't shake the feeling that they had narrowly escaped something that had marked this place for a reason. They reached the safety of the trees, and for a moment the mother stood still, looking back at the empty meadow. The wind whispered through the branches, but it wasn't a comforting sound. It was the whisper of something ancient, something that had been disturbed and had left its mark on the land. But the land was not the same as it had been. The very ground beneath her hooves felt different, colder, more lifeless. The ancient rhythms of the forest had been altered, and as the mother deer stepped into the woods with her fawn, she knew that nothing would ever be the same again. Something had changed in the heart of this wilderness. Something had been unleashed. The once thriving meadow, so full of life and promise, would never return to what it had been, and the mother deer couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had caused this shift was still watching, still waiting, deep within the forest shadows. The earth beneath them, as solid as it seemed, was not what it appeared, and though they had survived, they had entered a new kind of wilderness, one where the land itself could no longer be trusted, and where the shadows might be far more dangerous than the predators that roamed its depths. As the last rays of daylight faded into the forest, the mother and her fawn disappeared into the trees, leaving behind the meadow, a place that had once been their sanctuary, now a silent witness to an unsettling transformation that could never be undone. The forest stretched before them, its trees dense and looming, casting long shadows that swallowed up the last remnants of light. The night had settled in faster than usual, the darkness heavy and impenetrable. The air was thick with a strange stillness, as if every creature in the woods had gone into hiding, The only sound was the soft rustle of leaves underfoot as the mother deer carefully guided her fawn through the undergrowth. Her senses heightened, every step more cautious than the last. She paused, ears twitching at a distant sound, an unnatural creak like the bending of something ancient. She looked back over her shoulder, but the meadow was now just a dark expanse, swallowed up by the trees. It was behind them now, but the feeling lingered, the unsettling sense that the forest was not as it seemed. The very earth beneath their hooves seemed colder, as if it were alive and aware, reacting to their presence. The fawn, unusually quiet for its age, trotted beside her, its small body pressed close to hers. It too felt the change. Its once carefree movements had slowed, its wide eyes constantly scanning their surroundings, as if it expected something to leap from the shadows at any moment. The bond between them was palpable, an unspoken understanding that something was terribly wrong in this place. Suddenly, a sharp snap, like the crack of a branch breaking, cut through the silence. The mother deer froze, her muscles tensing, her gaze darting around. The fawn, too, stilled, its ears swiveling as it, too, tried to locate the source of the sound. They stood like statues, heartbeats synchronizing, breath shallow. Another crack, closer this time. The mother deer's instinct screamed at her to flee, to take her fawn and run as far and as fast as possible. But something was holding her in place. There was a pressure in the air, an invisible weight that kept her grounded, unable to move. She was trapped in the moment, locked in the forest's grasp, just as the meadow had been. And then the sound came again. Not a snap of a branch or the crack of a twig, but a low guttural growl. It rumbled from the depths of the forest, a vibration in the earth that resonated deep within her chest. It wasn't the growl of a predator, not of a wolf or a wildcat. No, this was something far more primal, a sound that carried an unspoken warning. The mother's gaze snapped to the source, but she saw nothing. The trees were thick, the underbrush tangled, and all that lay before her was darkness. But then, in the flickering light of the moon, she saw it, a shadow moving between the trees. A silhouette of something large, massive even, though she couldn't quite make out its form. It was moving deliberately, slowly, as if it were savoring the moment before it revealed itself. A wave of cold washed over the mother deer, and she felt the fawn instinctively press closer to her. They were no longer alone. Something had found them, something old and relentless, its presence seeping into the very fabric of the forest. The shadow moved again, this time closer. The mother deer's body was rigid with fear, her breath coming in shallow, sharp gasps. She could feel the weight of the creature's gaze, its predatory focus on them. But it remained just out of sight, just beyond the reach of the moonlight. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but she knew that no matter how fast they moved, they couldn't escape what was hunting them. And then a single, piercing cry echoed through the trees. A scream. A sound so terrible, so alien, that it made the mother's heart skip a beat. The fawn flinched at the sound, its eyes wide with terror. But before either of them could react, the world seemed to go completely still again. It was then that the trees, the ground, and the air seemed to pulse with a presence. This time not just one, but many. More shadows appeared, shifting in the darkness, their outlines more distinct now, like a gathering storm. The mother deer's body went rigid with terror. There were more of them, or of the creatures, and they were drawing closer. For a moment there was nothing but silence, thick and suffocating. The mother and her fawn stood frozen, waiting for the inevitable. The shadows continued to circle, their movements swift, precise, as if they were toying with their prey. Then, in a sudden blur of motion, the creatures surged forward. The mother deer instinctively reared back, her hooves scraping the earth as she tried to push her fawn toward safety. But the ground was treacherous, uneven. She couldn't run. They couldn't escape. The shadows moved faster now, their forms coming into view as they closed in, and in that moment the mother deer saw them. They weren't predators, not in the way she had feared, but they were something more ancient, more enigmatic. Tall figures with long, twisted limbs and eyes that shone like stars in the blackness. Their bodies seemed to shimmer and bend, like smoke swirling in the air, and they were moving with a fluidity that made them appear almost ethereal.